What do you actually do for a living? No, not your job title. Not what's written on your LinkedIn headline. I mean, what do you actually create? What gets better because you showed up? For some people, that question is simple. If you're a builder, something stands because of you. If you're a designer, something exists because you imagined it. But if you're a middle manager supervising a human resources team at a regional insurance underwriting firm, that question suddenly gets uncomfortable. Because over the last 100 years, something strange happened. A century ago, less than a quarter of workers were in service jobs. Today, close to 80%. Now when most people hear service job, they picture baristas, hotel staff, retail workers, people who serve coffee, bring your luggage, find your size in the back room. And whether those services are luxuries or not, you can still see the value. You walk away with something. A latte, a jacket, a carried suitcase, and an intact spine. But the service sector isn't just that. It includes call center agents, corporate analysts, compliance officers, consultants, even CEOs. In fact, it's harder now to find a job outside the service sector, unless you have a specialized certification. And that detail matters more than you think. Because alongside the rise of service work came something else. Jobs that feel off, roles that exist but don't quite produce anything measurable, positions that seem busy but strangely disconnected from value creation. And here's the confusing part. In theory, free markets are ruthless. If a company wastes money, it dies. If it hires people who contribute nothing, competitors should crush it. So why hasn't that happened? Why do so many modern organizations feel bloated, layered, filled with people whose main job seems to be justifying why they have a job? To understand that, we need to understand how money actually moves in the modern economy. And weirdly enough, we need to start with the Soviet Union. Yes, Soviet communism, because the Soviet system was built around something called noble labor. Work wasn't just economic. It was moral, honorable, identity-defining. The word Soviet literally translates to council, a workers' council. Labor wasn't just necessary, it was sacred. But that ideology created a problem. What happens when you promise everyone a job, and there isn't enough real work to go around? You invent work. Factory managers hired as many workers as possible, partly because overseeing more people made them look important, partly because if they didn't grab workers now, they might not get them later. Economists later called this worker hoarding, and it led to absurd outcomes. People were assigned to count endless inventories of nuts and bolts, not because it needed to be done, but because everyone had to be doing something. Now, obviously, modern capitalism isn't 1950s Russia, but the similarities? They're uncomfortable. And this.
The modern conversation about pointless work really exploded after anthropologist David Graeber published his book, Bullshit Jobs, and his argument was simple but brutal. A huge percentage of modern jobs exist primarily to justify their own existence. He broke these roles into 5 categories. The first, he called them flunkies. These are the people whose main function is to make someone else feel important. Think doormen in buildings that don't need security. Receptionists where check-in could easily be automated. Layers of assistants whose calendars are filled with scheduling meetings that shouldn't exist in the first place. If the job disappeared tomorrow, would anything break? Then you have the duct tapers. These are people hired to fix problems that shouldn't exist in the first place. Picture an inventory. Graeber even described someone whose full-time job was correcting the mistakes of a brilliant statistician who wasn't actually brilliant at all. The company didn't remove the problem. They just hired someone to constantly patch it. And here's where it gets subtle. The duct taper might actually create value, but they're forced to spend their energy compensating for structural incompetence. Now we move into a category that anyone who's worked corporate will recognize instantly. The box tickers. These are the compliance report writers, the internal newsletter editors, the culture coordinators, the people generating documents that almost nobody reads but everyone insists must exist, because without them, the company might look small, or unserious, or worse, unstructured. The goons, these aren't just neutral. These roles can actually create negative value. In-house corporate lawyers fighting other in-house corporate lawyers. Lobbyists reshaping regulations so competitors struggle to enter the market. Aggressive sales teams whose sole mission is to shift revenue from one giant corporation to another without creating anything new in the process. A classic example, patent warfare. Remember when Apple Inc. sued Samsung Electronics over smartphone design patents? Forget which side you support. Ask a different question. How much real economic value was created by thousands of hours spent litigating the shape of a rectangle with rounded corners? Finally, the category that hits a little too close to home. The taskmasters, managers supervising people who don't need supervision. Now, don't misunderstand, good management is real. Coordinating diverse skill sets, that's valuable. At best, that's expensive cheerleading. At worst, it's distraction disguised as leadership. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Some roles aren't just one category. They're all five, layered inside layered hierarchies, where each level exists to justify the level above it. So now we have the real question. If markets are supposed to eliminate inefficiency, why hasn't this system collapsed under its own weight? That's where incentives come in. Here's the thing most people miss. Companies don't make decisions. People inside companies do. And people respond to incentives. In the Soviet Union, managers hoarded workers because having more employees made them look powerful. It made their department feel important. It protected their future access to labor. Sound familiar? Today, a middle manager who oversees 12 people feels more important than one who oversees 4. A VP running 3 divisions commands more status than one running one. Headcount becomes a proxy for significance. Budget size becomes a proxy for influence. And suddenly, trimming unnecessary roles doesn't feel like efficiency. It feels like shrinking your own power. This is how bureaucracy survives inside capitalism. Not because markets love inefficiency, but because decision makers are rewarded for scale, not precision. Modern corporations have something else. LinkedIn. Scroll for 5 minutes and you'll see it. I'm honored to have spearheaded a cross-functional initiative to optimize customer-centric digital synergy across multiple verticals. But it sounds impressive. It signals movement, activity, importance. The modern economy doesn't just reward productivity. It rewards visible busyness. And that's a critical difference. In many companies, it's not enough to finish your work. You must appear engaged for the full duration. If you complete your meaningful tasks in 4 hours, you stretch them to 8. You schedule meetings. You draft strategy decks. You circle back. Because leaving early signals low commitment even if your output is superior. So instead of asking, is this work valuable? We ask, is everyone occupied? Now layer government regulation on top of that . Let's use the United States as an example. You want to build a factory? You need zoning approvals, environmental assessments, insurance coverage, contract tenders, tariff compliance if you export. labor law documentation. Each of those requirements might be defensible individually, but collectively, they generate entire ecosystems of compliance specialists, consultants, auditors, and legal teams. Now again, some of this is necessary, but here's the catch. The more complex the rules become, the harder it is for small competitors to enter the market. And who benefits from that? Large corporations, because they can afford entire departments dedicated to navigating bureaucracy. So over time, lobbying increases, legislation expands, complexity compounds, and suddenly, starting a business without a team of accountants and lawyers becomes nearly impossible. No conspiracy required, just incentives. And this is the part nobody likes to admit. We don't just tolerate these roles. We socially reward them. Impressive titles,